Hello and welcome to the Power Grid, the footballguys.com DFS show. I'm your host, Austin Lee, and I'm joined, as always, by Jeff Pasquino, Devin Knotts, John Lee, and Ryan Hester. We're excited to welcome back Jeff Pasquino after being on assignment last week. Jeff, I want to ask you the same question I asked John at the beginning of last show. You were there at the FanDuel Live Finals, raking in the fat stacks, and I just assumed that all offseason you spent it eating caviar and flying around in a private jet and spending time. You were probably in Monaco last week. Tell us tales of your adventures.
Well, I did stop by Las Vegas, but all that money is now reallocated. So I'm all ready to play some more DFS this year.
Excellent. That's how we pull him back in. Similar story to John. He did some remodeling or something. Boring. He's back. So good to have you guys back. And we're all going to get into another live finals this year for our caviar eating tastes. So this is the preseason week 3 episode. We're going to be covering just the main slate. So that's the 9 games on Saturday night, August 26th. And we're going to try to get you ready to build your lineups for that slate. So let's talk a little general strategy first, guys. This is week 3, meaning it's the dress rehearsal for these teams before the regular season. John, let me pitch it to you. Do you think there's anything special about this week in terms of how we approach our DFS lineups, knowing that maybe these starters are going to get a little bit more playing time than they did in week 1 and week 2?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you're pretty much hitting on it already, and that is that this is the 1 week in preseason where we want to be thinking about playing the starters, the name brand players that we'll be playing here in a few weeks when the season actually starts. Now, I think as we walk through these games and talk about some of these situations, you're going to find that there are certain teams that do not play their starters as deep as others, and Houston comes to mind there. Bill O'Brien has traditionally not played his starters very deep into the game, so this is a situation where you're going to want to avoid guys like DeAndre Hopkins. Well, he wouldn't be playing anyhow, but you get the point. Lamar Miller is not going to be in there for a very long. Whereas other teams, you're going to see them play pretty much the whole first half, and in some cases, maybe even a few series into the second half. So you need to be aware historically what's going on there and try to take advantage. And certainly we're going to guide you through that over the next half an hour or so.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've done our research to figure out over the past few seasons which coaches and which teams tend to play their starters more than others. Devin, looking at some of these matchups this week, some of our top stories, is there anything that's especially interesting to you on this slate that you're looking for in week 3?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So I think that a couple things stand out initially. One is DeShone Kizer in Cleveland. All signs are pointing to him locking down the starting job. It was really peculiar. They were running designed runs in a preseason, which is not something that you typically want to do unless the guys, they're trying to give him game reps. And then the other stories in Pittsburgh. So Le'Veon Bell's still out. He hasn't reported. He's reported, but he hasn't been at camp. So James Conner is expected to continue to take the load in the preseason. So those are 2 of the main stories. There's a bunch of other stories that all the other guys touch on, though.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, is there one that sticks out to you from this preseason batch?
Yeah, I actually write the training camp reports for Pittsburgh and Baltimore. So the James Conner one did there too. But then also, I've been following a lot of the Baltimore beat writers and newspaper writers. And there was a gentleman from the Baltimore Sun who tweeted out that actually Buck Allen has been the most impressive running back there. Danny Woodhead tweaked a hamstring during the week here. So, Buck Allen is going to get a lot of run in this game, both on merit and on, just pure, I guess, attrition or opportunity. So that's a story I'm following too.
Yeah, that's a good one. Jeff, let's come back to you and ask, is there another game or storyline from this week that you're curious about?
Well, I know that some teams like to come out of preseason with at least one win for just to get a feel for winning. And I'm looking at that Baltimore-Buffalo game. Both teams are struggling right now in the preseason. And I think that in addition to Buck Allen, there's a couple of sleepers in the Baltimore side that may be playing a little bit more than people expect.
Yeah, that's a good one. We'll touch on that a little bit later. I mean, obviously, Joe Flacco is not going to be playing, but some of their other starters might see some interesting action in that one. John, wrap us up on our top stories. Is there another game that has an interesting storyline for you?
For me, it's not so much the storylines. I mean, you guys hit the big ones. What I'll be looking for this week, I like to play a lot of GPPs in the preseason. I think it's set up better for GPPs, and some of the bigger prize pools are there, obviously. I think to win a GPP this week, what you need to be doing is the vast majority of people are going to focus in on the starters for the same reasons we've been talking about to this point in the show. But there are going to be those individuals that are in roster battles that get at least a half a play that nobody's going to want to roster, names like Tress Anderson in Houston. And you need to nail those guys at low ownership. And so that's where I'm really focusing a lot of my attention to heading into the weekend.
Yeah, we've already mentioned a couple of guys that I think are going to be pretty heavily owned this week. But let's move on to our chalk plays. Ryan, I'll pitch this to you. Who do you think is going to be the highest owned quarterback of the week in preseason week 3?
Because he's a starter, because he's an up-and-coming player, and because he's done well in the first 2 weeks, I would probably say Jameis Winston in Tampa. And also because he's playing Cleveland. So, matchups even matter in the preseason too. So I would say Jameis Winston for sure there.
Yeah, and, this is the third season in a row where the Browns and the Buccaneers have faced off in week 3 of the preseason. And both of these teams have played their starters a full first half the past 2 years. So I expect to see much of the same from Cleveland and Tampa Bay this weekend. Devin, are there other players that stand out to you at quarterback as chalk plays, or maybe at a different position that seems like a big chalk play for the week?
Yeah, I think Winston's going to take a lot of the ownership at the quarterback position. I think though right alongside of him is Mike Evans on the other side, on the same team. So I think those two are going to be immensely popular. So in cash games, I think it's almost a no-brainer to play the two. But you really have to decide if you want to differentiate yourself elsewhere, or if you want to just eat. Sometimes it's okay to just go with the chalk. If they hit, you don't want to be on the other side of not having them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think Evans and Winston are going to be two of the highest owned players. John, any other chalky plays that you see other than the Tampa Bay passing receiving duo?
I mean, have we talked about James Conner yet? I mean, I think he's going to be the chalkiest guy of the week, and Le'Veon Bell's not playing. He had, 20 carries last week. We know that Tomlin traditionally doesn't care about how many carries he gives to his running backs, and Conner is trying out for this backup position. And I've seen on Twitter a few people questioning whether or not he was going to be able to do that heading into last week, and he put up almost 100 yards. I think that he'll be certainly heavily owned, knowing that Le'Veon Bell's not coming, and so I expect to see him at least 25, if not 30% owned this week.
Yeah, with Le'Veon Bell officially announcing that he's not going to be reporting until September 1st, we know for sure that he's not going to be seeing any preseason action. Jeff, I'm having a tough time finding a chalk play at tight end this week. Is there a tight end chalk play, or is there another chalk play at another position you think is worth mentioning?
Well, I will throw out that I think the Raiders passing game could have some chalk to it because they were pretty successful last week, as could be the Rams with Jared Goff. But as far as the tight end position, that's kind of tough this week. I think my favorite is Evan Ingram, just from the Giants, just because they're probably going to be keeping out OBJ because of it's a short slate. They've only played 4 days ago, but they're resting players. But I think he could easily be the wide receiver too for that team with Shepard this week to save some of the starters.
Yeah, it sure seems like Odell Beckham is definitely going to sit. It would not surprise me if Brandon Marshall sits in that game as well. And so that makes Eli Manning having to hone in on some of those other pass catchers. I like that you mentioned the Raiders there. The Raiders are the only team on this slate who have had their starters play into the third quarter each of the last 2 years. So of all the teams in the slate this week, the Raiders are the ones who have traditionally played their starters the most. Let's move on past the chalk plays here and look at some other quarterback plays. Ryan, I'll pitch this one to you first. Who else do you like at quarterback? We've already mentioned DeShone Kizer, as well as, obviously Jameis Winston. Who else do you like at quarterback this week?
And then we just mentioned Derek Carr too, who I wrote down. But I guess a little more off the board. I've got a couple, but one of them, Trevor Siemian is going to win the job in Denver. And so with jobs that are kind of unsettled going into week 3 that look like they're going to get settled, I feel like those are the quarterbacks that are going to play longer because they've been splitting reps all camp. So Siemian, is one, and then even deeper. This one might take this is a GPP dart, but Josh Dobbs in Pittsburgh is still going to get all the reps. He's been brutal so far in the first 2 games, but Roethlisberger last year I think played 2 series, and Landry Jones is still fighting an abdominal injury, so not sure if he's going to play. So if he doesn't, Dobbs will get 2 quarters, 2.5, maybe more.
Yeah, those sound like good recommendations, Ryan. I'm going to pitch this to you, Devin. Are there any other quarterbacks that you have your eye on, maybe as like a GPP play?
Yeah, I think there's a perceived bias that Jared Goff is just this atrocious quarterback. He's still developing. I mean, he looked very good last week, though. He was 16 of 20, threw a touchdown. They're still going to give him a ton of time. They have a lot invested in him, and they want to make sure that he gets as much game time as possible. So I think the bias of Goff isn't a good quarterback when we truly don't know because he's only played for a year. And this coaching staff wants to get accustomed to him. So Goff is a guy that I think will play a significant amount of time in this game and should be at least looked at.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation. How about this? Deshaun Watson last week went 3 for 10 passing, but he's had back-to-back games of at least 100 yards passing and back-to-back games with a rushing touchdown. Let me see Black Eyed Joe vote here. Is Deshaun Watson a guy you'll be considering this week at quarterback? Everyone says no but me. Excellent. So just pretend like I didn't recommend that because clearly I'm out on a limb there.
Well,
Let's move. Yeah.
Austin, before we jump, I actually have another quarterback that's a runner. That was my sleeper pick from the Baltimore game, which is Josh Woodrum, who had 2 rushing touchdowns last week. And I think he's going to get a lot of play. And he had over 110 yards passing last week. So I think that's a sleeper GPP that not many people are going to be on. And, again, I think the Ravens could beat up on the Bills this week.
Nice. Excellent. And with Flacco out, they got to play, some of these other quarterbacks a little bit more than teams that don't have injuries like that they're dealing with. Let's talk about running backs. John, I'll pitch it to you to talk about running backs. We've already talked about James Conner there in Pittsburgh. Who are some other guys that you like at running back?
Yeah, I mean, looking over my notes, I think a few guys you need to be thinking about this week. What is it, DeAndre Washington in Oakland's? Marshawn Lynch, we know he's not going to play a lot. And DeAndre Washington actually saw some first-team snaps last week, so I expect him to get the majority of the looks there in the first half with that first-team offense, going up against the Cowboys, who have not been, they've not been stellar on defense so far. So I have no problem rolling him out there. Last week on the show, I think certainly I was on him, and I think a few others were as well. Dante Freeman in Houston, he's the Foreman, is probably going to get some extra looks again this week. He's certainly one that I think we should be thinking about. And then Buck Allen is a guy that after Woodhead went down with a hamstring injury earlier this week, and Terrence West has been miserable in the preseason. I think they have to give it to Javorius Allen and see what he can do heading into the season. So those would be 3 guys that would be certainly at the top of my radar.
Yeah, and I think those guys are going to be pretty heavily owned as well. Jeff, I'll pitch it to you for more running backs. Is there another guy that John didn't mention that you have your eye on at running back?
Yeah, there is one. I think it's kind of going off the board here, but I think the Saints they know what they have in Mark Ingram, they know what they have in Adrian Peterson. But I think you could be seeing a lot of Alvin Kamara this week. And he found pay dirt last week, 60 yards rushing, and I think that's a guy that take the pressure off of Breeze, just to give the ball, and he could be playing against that second string and running up pretty good numbers this week.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation, and especially because the Saints traditionally have not played their starters very long in the preseason, even in Week 3. So I could see them leaning on him heavily instead of those starters, like you said. Any other running backs for you, Devin or Ryan, that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I think you should continue to look at the Dallas Cowboys running backs, so McFadden or Morris. So Morris played into the third quarter last week. We know how good this offensive line is in Dallas. So regardless of what running back is going in, if they're rotating defensive linemen, if they're doing, a variety of different things, trying things out on defense, these running backs were tearing up the Colts last week. Yes, it's the Colts, so their run D didn't look good, but with this offensive line, they're going to be looking to solidify the run and make sure that without Elliott, they have a solid game plan heading into the season.
Yeah, and the quote from Jerry Jones, I think, was, Ezekiel Elliott might play a few snaps. So it sounds like if Ezekiel Elliott plays, it will be hardly any at all. So I like that pick. Ryan, did you have another guy you wanted to mention?
Yeah, one more real quick. If Devontae Freeman, if his concussion keeps him out in Atlanta, Teron Ward is somebody to look at. Teron Ward, he played last week. He had a touchdown that capped off a drive in which Matt Ryan was still the quarterback. So he was spelling Tevin Coleman with the ones, and he ran with the twos. So that's the kind of guy you want, who's going to get some time with the ones and then all the time with the twos.
Yeah, Freeman's been officially ruled out, so I think that's a great recommendation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's move on to wide receivers. John, I'll pitch this to you. What receivers, aside from Mike Evans, who we've already said is probably the highest owned guy this week, what other receivers are you looking to play this week?
Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets tough, right? I mean, I don't think there's anything here that stands out dramatically to me. Obviously Evans we've talked about. I think Cooper Kupp there in Los Angeles has been tremendous in the preseason. He'll continue to get looks to potentially get a starting position on that offense. So Cooper Kupp is one I definitely like. Again, I'm coming at this from a GPP angle. Guys that I have on my list here, I think that we didn't talk about it, but Chase Daniel's a guy that's on my GPP list this week. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of Drew Brees, and Ryan Nassib has looked dreadful. So I think that Chase Daniel will get a lot of time there. And one guy that he works with quite a bit is Tommy Lee Lewis. So that'll be a GPP connection that I have there. And it looks like Ryan maybe agrees with that. Outside of, those guys, we can name the obvious ones. Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, I think one of those guys will definitely score this week, and they should certainly be on your short list of players. And then potentially over there in Green Bay, some of the guys I like are the names that we know, but not the Devontae Adams or the Jordy Nelson, but instead Jeff Janis, who made a nice catch last week, and Geronimo Allison. I think we'll see those guys playing more snaps than they generally do because Jordy and Devontae will be limited.
Yeah, and obviously Aaron Rodgers doesn't typically play a whole lot in the preseason, so they'll be moving to those backups pretty quickly in that game. Devin, who else do you like at receiver?
That's right. Going back to it, home game. He was in the game for, I think it was 2 series last week, and he was targeted 4 or 5 times and scored a touchdown. And all the talk has been Dak Prescott and Des Bryant trying to look together and really try and form a connection since they didn't play that much together last year. So he's a guy that at home, traditionally in the preseason, he's done very well, and they've given him red zone targets. So he's one of the top guys on my board again this week.
Yeah, I think that's another good pick. Jeff and Ryan, do you have any receivers you're looking to talk about this time? Jeff, what do you got?
I got one GPP play, which is, again, the Bills are 0-2. They're playing the Ravens. They're trying to get a win. Andre Holmes has gotten a little bit of press this week that he's looked good. They might be looking to target him some. They just traded away their top wide receiver. They're looking to trade all their assets. Somebody's got to step up as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Problem with playing him, of course, is that you're playing a Bills quarterback along with him to get him the ball. So it's purely a GPP play.
Yeah, it's risky, but they're still trying to figure out who their receiving core is when they've kind of, lost 2 or 3 top guys with Anquan Bolden retiring and Jordan Matthews still recovering from injury. Probably not going to play in this game. It's got to go to somebody, right?
And Holmes is the only outside, perimeter type profile receiver that they have left.
Yeah, exactly. So they've definitely been talking him up a little bit, maybe out of necessity, but he's been getting a little bit of buzz from the Bills coaches.
A guy in that game that you might want to keep your eye on, in addition to him, is Philly Brown. I think Philly Brown is somebody they're going to have to see what they've got in terms of stock behind Zay Jones and Holmes. So don't sleep on Philly Brown as a GPP in that same game.
But again, you're investing as part of that into a Buffalo Bills quarterback, so that's part of the problem there. Yeah. But I agree with you, John. I agree with the plan.
Yeah, totally. That's preseason week 3, right? You're going to be taking quite a few risks. Let's move on to tight ends here. And to me, there's a whole bunch of meh here. Like, I've probably got 6 different guys on my list that, hey, maybe they get 50 yards, maybe they get a touchdown, but there's not really a guy that stands out for me. Ryan, do you have a tight end play that you like?
Like is a pretty relative term, but I'll give one that got 40 yards last week. How about that?
Sure.
Baltimore's trying to figure out what they're doing at the position. They have 3 options that, as you just described, would be meh. So, but the one that stood out last week, so the 3 options are Ben Watson, who's 37 years old, coming off an Achilles tear. Larry Donnell, who, he had that one great year with the Giants, but he's old and slow too. They each got 1 target last week. Max Williams is a former second-round pick that has done nothing, and this team probably wants to see him do something to return on that investment. He looked really athletic on one play at a 25-yard catch, I think, last week.
40.
He had 40 total, or 40-yard reception. You're right. I wrote 40 yards, but it was a 40-yard catch, and he looked great, made a couple guys miss. And so, maybe they run him out there for a few more targets, and if a handful of targets results in a touchdown, then you're probably rising above the rest at tight end this week.
Or who knows, maybe they signed Gary Barnidge before Saturday.
Which they maybe should have done 2 months ago.
Devin, is there a tight end not named Gary Barnidge that you're looking at?
Yeah, Gary Barnidge isn't going to be signed, so don't take that advice. Gerald Everett for the Rams. Him and Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee are fighting it out for the starting position in Los Angeles, and so far it's looking like Gerald Everett may have the upper hand. He may have the upper hand this year. So he had 4 targets last week. 3 were from Goff, while Higbee only had 1. This is a rookie from South Alabama who tore it up in college. So he's a guy that is incredibly athletic and someone who, if he's given the opportunity, could be very good this week in this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Jeff or John, any other tight end recommendations? Jeff, you look like you got one.
I just want to go back and echo what Devin said just for one reason, and that is that people need to remember that some games are nationally televised, and that's going to indicate some people are going to play those a little bit more, and the Rams game is nationally televised. So that's going to lead to a little bit more ownership because a lot of people are going to want to watch the players they're playing.
Interesting. Yeah, people want skin in the game, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. John, any other tight end guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are 2 other guys that are kind of on my list. One is Austin Hooper in Atlanta. I think that, he could be a guy that sees some additional looks. He's had a pretty good camp this season. He goes across from, Talio, who's a blocking tight end. Hooper is the receiving guy in that offense, and certainly we're not going to see a whole lot, if any, of Julio Jones. So I think that he's definitely a receiving option. And looking at the list that you compiled together for us, Austin, it looks like Atlanta Last year, they played the entire first half, those starters. So certainly he's a guy that could be on your list. And then, going back to Jeff's argument earlier about quarterbacks getting the ball to the receiver, certainly you could take that stance with this recommendation. But I don't know who in Jets land is going to catch balls any longer. And I mean, they just released Marquez Wilson this week. Robbie Anderson's still out. Quincy Enunwa was out. I mean, maybe Sharon Peak as a wide receiver, but their best receiver, their most talented receiver, is Austin Seferian-Jenkins. And I think that he's got to be a guy that you at least consider, simply because there's nobody else to catch the ball. If they throw the ball 25 times, which I think is reasonable, a couple of those have to be at him. And on a week where we really don't have a whole lot of clues about the tight end position, he's certainly on my list.
The most talented receiver on the Jets is the guy in the stands who's catching Christian Hackenberg's errant passes. Sorry to derail that, but I had to because Christian Hackenberg is the running joke of this show. One additional play, Coby Fleener. So Coby Fleener played into the fourth quarter last week, which was a bit of a surprise. Him and Willie Snead both did. And if he's playing into the fourth quarter, he's gonna get looks. He didn't get targeted much last week, but seeing him out there for into the fourth quarter is something that you have to at least pay attention to.
Yeah. Worst case, if you don't know what to do at tight end, play one that has Austin in their name, and you'll be great. Let's move on to defenses and kickers. Let's look at the Black Eyed Joe signs here. Who wants to talk about a defense or a kicker? Hold up your signs. Oh, wait, hold on. I can't see Ryan's. There's Ryan. Okay, we got people who want to talk.
I'll let you guys handle it.
Excellent. That's totally fine. Let's go to John to talk about a defense.
Oh, we're not talking about kickers when I'm talking, right? Yeah, I mean, the Jets scored 6 points last week, and the week prior, they scored 7. So they've got 13 points through 2 weeks. And this week they go up against the Giants, and I think the Giants have a legitimate defense this year. Their defensive front is much improved. Their secondary was good last year, just kind of banged up. Last week I believe I've forgotten how many times that Hackenberg got sacked, but it was quite a few. You got JPP up front. Hackenberg wants no part of this, and anybody on that offense wants no part of the Giants this week. The issue there is they're probably going to be about 30% owned. So that's what you get when you take them. But I mean, what are the odds of the Jets scoring more than, I don't know, double-digit points? I'd say it's about 50%. And anytime that happens, I definitely I want a piece of the opposing defense.
Yeah, this is going to be an ugly battle for the Meadowlands. The Jets have held opponents to 19 total points this preseason, and the Giants have not scored a touchdown yet this preseason. So maybe it'll be 6-3, something like that. It's going to be a barn burner. Jeff, do you have I know you got kickers, but do you have a defense also?
Yeah, I definitely have a kicker, but let's start with the defense. Now, I'm looking at Pittsburgh this week. I think that they're playing the Colts, an Andrew Luckless Colts team. You're looking at a number 1 team going against pretty much a number 2 team right out of the gate. So I think the Steelers, they're Vegas likes them for what that's worth. But I think the Steelers look pretty good as a number 1 defense. And I think that the teams going against the Browns and the Giants on short rest, they're probably going to be more heavily owned, as John pointed out. But I think that the Steelers could be more of a GPP play.
Yeah. Tell me about your favorite kicker this week, Jeff, because I know you've always got at least one.
Well, I had to do some digging because I knew you guys would ask. So my kicker this week is for a team that's going to be in a dome. For a team that's going to has an old quarterback, some old receivers, and they're probably going to be resting their number 1 running back. So I'm looking at Phil Dawson of the Arizona Cardinals at Atlanta. So I heard some talk that Dawson, they signed him this year. They want to see he's got a big leg still. He said he could probably still hit from 60. So he's already made a 52-yarder in preseason. So he's my kicker this week.
Nice. I don't know if I buy that 60-yard thing, but hey, I'd love to see it. I
don't know if Dawson's ever made a kick from 60, but
exactly. What do you think, Devin? You got a defense or a kicker we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I think Tampa Bay is one that has to be considered, and it's going to be popular because DeShone Kizer's playing. I think at some point last week, 6 of his 8 passes that were completed were behind the line of scrimmage, and he threw what was a horrible interception that should not have been thrown last week, but it was negated by a penalty. So take that into consideration. He's not looking as good as everyone's saying. It's just that Brock Osweiler and Cody Kessler are looking worse than DeShone Kizer. So it's one of those situations where pick on the rookie. If you want to take the Saints defense and hope Deshaun Watson continues to be horrible as well. That's a little bit off the radar because no one likes the Saints defense, but pick on the rookies in these types of games because they're going to be asked to do things as if they were playing a regular season game.
Yeah, I think that's good general advice there. Be careful with these kickers like you did last week. 7 of the teams on this slate used multiple kickers last week. So the 2 guys I like that feel safe to me are Justin Tucker of Baltimore and Brandon McManus in Denver. Those guys seem to just be doing all the kicking of field goals and extra points for their teams. All right, guys, that wraps up our defenses and kickers. Let's move on to parting thoughts. John, do you have any words of wisdom or players that you didn't get to mention in this preseason week 3 show?
No major words of wisdom. I just echo what I said last week. Take it easy, enjoy it. Last week I think I played about 10% maybe of the volume I play in a typical season, and I doubled my money last week. So it was a nice week. I got to enjoy some football. It was fun. I'll probably do something similar this week. In terms of people I have not mentioned, I don't know. Trevor Siemian as a GPP play. He's named the starter this week. Nobody likes Trevor Siemian, and I think that he's a guy that you could look at. We didn't talk about it, but the Baltimore defense, I think, is pretty good this week. They're going up against the Bills offense that allowed 6 sacks last week through 3 interceptions against the Eagles. We could potentially expect more of that in Baltimore this week with a very low total and a home favorite.
Yeah, those are good extra players to throw in there. Ryan, parting thoughts, words of wisdom.
Yeah, just general strategy stuff that I kind of hinted on earlier, but I want to find these guys that I'm calling tweeners, guys that are going to get time with the ones, but that'll lead the twos. So I mentioned Teron Ward in Atlanta before. Buck Allen's one. James Conner is one. Maybe even Justin Hunter in Pittsburgh if you're looking real deep, because Antonio Brown isn't going to play very much, if at all. Cooper Kupp, and then Devin mentioned Gerald Everett before too, also in LA. So those are the guys I had on kind of my tweener list. So, but if you find anybody that has a chance to play with ones, and we'll definitely play with twos. Those we talked opportunity last week, and so this week's the same thing.
Yeah, that seems like a good thing to look for in terms of playing time. Jeff, what are your words of wisdom as we wrap up the show?
Well, for one thing, you're still going to have a lot of dead money in these contests because people are going to play players that aren't going to be playing. So don't ignore the cash. We talked a lot about GPPs, but don't ignore cash games. There are good cash game plays, and you're probably playing against probably about 10% dead teams that don't have a shot because they're playing somebody that's not even playing. So that's a good play. If you're most of the play is going to be GPPs, don't be afraid to put it into a satellite or maybe earn a ticket for week 1 for the big GPP. So take a shot at that. One player I didn't get to mention, and I'll lead into my last point, which is Charles Clay, tight end. I think that he could very well get a lot of play this week against Baltimore. They need receivers. He's been the number 1 option of Tyrod Taylor for a long time. They could see him a lot. And lastly, if you want to mix it up at GPPs, don't be afraid to use a running back or a tight end. Yeah, as I've listened to the show, we've thrown out a lot of what-if tight ends, but we didn't do much with wide receiver. So at the flex spot, consider a running back or tight end. That'll be definitely a different thing to approach this week than not many people will do, especially in PPR.
Yeah, that makes sense to try to mix it up a little bit. Devin, what are your final thoughts for the show?
Yeah, I think the guys have covered it for the most part. One thing I just wanted to call out is, once again, our DFS package. So footballguys.com/DFS is how you can find it. We're going to have 15 to, I think it's about 18 articles a week, 20 articles a week. Still finalizing it. we are updating our interactive value charts. So we are going to have a multi-lineup generator, which will be in a beta form this year. So we're excited about that. And then the same projections, same consensus value rankings, although they'll be in a much better format than they were last year. So our goal this year was to make it easier, and if you're a season-long member, it's only $15. So it's really a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's our Football Guys Insider Pro Plus package. Check that out. Also, we've got the training camp updates that aren't DFS-specific content, but they're super helpful, especially for digging deep into the depth charts like you need to win these preseason games. It's like a 40-page document that comes out every Wednesday. Be sure to check out those training camp updates over at footballguys.com. We're going to take a week off next week, and we're not going to have a show for preseason week 4. I recommend you also take a week off from, playing some crazy DFS in week 4. But we will be back for week 1 of the regular season and every week thereafter. Thank you for watching. On behalf of John Lee and Devin Knotts and Jeff Pasquino and Ryan Hester, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out all of our DFS content over at footballguys.com, click on the icon in front of Ryan's face. To subscribe to our Football Guys TV YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click below me now.